It's very nice to be here. My name is Francesco Saverio, but everybody calls me Saverio, and I'm a PhD candidate at the European University Institute in Florence. So you might notice that I streamlined the title a bit. I mean, this is obviously due to the fact that I am time constrained, but I also think that it's more focused now. It's more clear what I want to talk about in this paper. Namely, I want to talk about how working from home might impact intergenerational mobility and more broadly inequality. Okay, so let's try to set the stage and the framework that I want to analyze. So I don't think I have to convince anybody here that working from home is going to stay. I think this is very clear from the presentation we have already seen. And I think there is also another important point that has been made in these 2 days of conference, meaning that working from home is unevenly distributed across workers. In particular, what I'm interested about is that working from home is mostly available for highly educated workers in high-income jobs. Now, if you think that these people are probably already advantaged in transmitting their skills towards the new offspring, what are the implications of working from home in the long term for inequality and intergenerational mobility? So this is more or less what this paper wants to talk about. And obviously, it's a model question because it's a little bit ahead of the data. However, I'm going to try to convince you that there are 2 clear channels through which working from home might have intergenerational effects that can also already be visible in the data. And I'm going to show you some patterns in microdata through the American Time Use Survey and the American Community Survey to inform my model. In particular, the first mechanism that I have in mind is an education time reallocation mechanism. So we know from the education of economics literature that college people, educated people, on average, spend more time educating their children, anticipating the struggle of making it through the academic career. And if you think about the fact that working from home people might save some time from commuting, they can spend this time productively educating their children more. So this is the first mechanism I have in mind, but I also have in mind the second mechanism, which is related to the donut effect. The fact that with the couple jobs from the office place, which means that now people can relocate towards suburbs, but might also relocate towards places with better schools. So here, what I'm plotting are averages. It's just to give you an idea. These are just the descriptive evidence of education time with children. So the education time is something that I code myself from the American Time Use Survey. And it's basically a variable that embeds both direct academic supports of parents toward children, like doing homework together, and cognitively enriching activities with children, like, for instance, going to the museum, reading together, this sort of stuff. So the only thing I want you to grasp from these graphs is that, first, the magnitude. So on average, people spend 1 to 1.1 hour educating their children. And then there is a gradient that of working from home parents spending more time educating their children, which is, I mean, clearly, sorry, I don't know the pointer, but here. So it's clearly happening for working from home versus not working from home, but it's stable across different specifications. So in heterogeneous analysis on gender, education, and youngest child age. Now, obviously, this is just descriptive. So what I do, I also run a regression, but I'm going to be clear about it. Like, I don't want any causality police to hate me, so it's not causal effect, but I see a pattern here. And what I do, I regress weekly education time of parents with children on a bunch of controls plus a working from home dummy. And what I found, it's a significant effect that is robust to different specification of about 1/4 of an hour additional education time that parents spend with children. Now let's go to the second mechanism. I'm trying to be fast, I'm sorry, but my time is limited today. So the second mechanism is something that we want to understand, right? So are working from home parents relocating towards neighborhood with better school? So in order to answer this question, I take the microdata from the American Community Survey post-COVID of parents with children between 5 to 15, and I merge this data with the school quality data from a Chetty and co-author dataset. Then I estimate this probit model where I regress the probability of a parents moving towards a neighborhood with a better school quality on a bunch of controls and a working from home dummy. Again, these are patterns, but what I find is that on average, working from home parents are 3.3 to 3.7 percentage point more likely to relocate towards neighborhood with better schools. Now, with these 2 mechanisms in mind, I build a model to study the effect on inequality and intergenerational mobility. In this model, I have a 2-period overlapping generation spatial model which in some sort is also similar to the one that Michael presented yesterday. So in my model, agents have lived for 2 periods. In the first period, there's just children. They are not taking any active decisions. They passively accumulate human capital. In the second period, they become adults and they take a lot of decisions in terms of location, where to live, in terms of labor supply, how much labor to supply, housing, consumption, and time allocation, especially education time with children decision. So in my model, agents are heterogeneous in 3 key dimensions. One is the ability to accumulate human capital. The second, the human capital itself, that in my models, it's somehow a productivity at work. And the third dimension, is the working from home availability. Like this dimension in my model is exogenous. So somebody is lucky and is born with the possibility to do working from home, and somebody is not. Obviously, I can talk more how I estimate this probability and how I calibrate my model with this. But now, just stay with me with this assumption. Then parents take decision where to live, meaning that they can decide to live in a central business district or in a suburb. They are different in terms of rents, commuting time, and crucially about the spillover effect of neighborhood, which I'm going to talk about in the very next moment. In fact, there are 2 key technologies in my model. One is the working from home technology, which basically parents that are working from home, they can decide intensively how much hour to allocate towards office hours or home office hours through a CES. So I treat these 2, the choice variable, as imperfect substitutes. And the second technology is this endogenous human capital accumulation of the children, which is a linear function of the ability of the children times the Cobb-Douglas between E, which is the education time of the parent of the children, and S of Z. Z is the location, so suburb of, or CBD. S is basically what I call the neighbor spillover, which is a proxy for school quality and is the expected human capital of children in that neighborhood. So this basically is more or less the 2 mechanisms I was talking about. One is the education time of parents, and the other one is the sorting effect in 2 different neighborhoods. So let me jump to the results. As I was mentioning, in my model, it's not only similar to the one of Michael in the framework, but also in the calibration strategy, meaning that I am assuming that in the pre-COVID we are in a steady state. I assumed this to be 2013. And then we see a working from home shock, and I computed the post-COVID steady states, and I use the pre-COVID as a counterfactual, so to speak. So what I found are 2 important effects. One is a direct within generation effect of working from home, meaning that I find that people that are working from home are 3.8 percentage points more likely to end up in the top decile of the income distribution compared to non-working from home people. This is within generation. And it's, I mean, I can talk more about it, but I think that the very interesting finding is this intergenerational effect, so across between generation effect. What I do find is that when I look at children that are, people that are not working from home, when they had a parent that was previously working from home, they are 1.9 percentage point more likely to end up in the top decile of the income distribution. So somehow this is through these 2 mechanisms that I was talking about, education and relocation. And I'm sorry, I'm running out of time, so I just want to plot here like this CDF of these different type of people over the income, log income distribution. And basically this gap that you see, between the Ch curves are here in the panel A, this direct within generation effect, and here the between generation effect. Then I decompose for all 4 types. And what I found in a counterfactual is that the main driver is the education time. So when I shut down the education channels, basically the intergenerational channel almost disappear. So I'm jumping to the conclusion because I'm running really out of time. I think the only thing I want to mention is like that there are policy implications of this paper, meaning that maybe we have to ensure that the opportunity doesn't really become a perk of working from home. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any comment. Yeah, please.
Really interesting. So 2 great things. One, Steve may say this, but the more educate, it's a tricky thing because it increases inequality, but mainly by improving it for some, but not taking away for others. So if you were to do a welfare analysis, it's not it's not bad.
Not clear.
The other thought, but more substantive, is just your functional form is Cobb-Douglas between schooling quality and parental time, which makes them both complements.
Right.
You could have tried like CES, where they can be substitutes. It's not obvious. Like if the school system's terrible, it may be more valuable to have parents at home. CES, I don't know. I'll stop there, but it's very
No, this is absolutely a good point. So the thing is this, in order to defend, obviously depending on the functional form, you might get different results, obviously. The way in which I defend this is usually that most of the models that I am referring to in this literature of intergenerational mobility, they use this specification, like Zang and Graham, for instance, in which they have exactly school quality and education time. I was talking also in other conferences about the possibility to use a CS. So I'm thinking about it, but maybe it's an extension because, by the way, this is my job market. So I need to have something ready in the next month, and I cannot like now start to run additional. Yeah, sorry. Please, yeah.
So look, I love this topic, but as Nick anticipated, putting the focus on the inequality is the wrong thing. First order effect is work from home appears to be pro-human capital formation.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Just because the rest of the profession is obsessed with inequality doesn't mean you have to be. So that's the headline.
This is a good point.
Second thing, maybe I missed it, or I misunderstood, but it looks like your specification has the effect of moving to another neighborhood, working through spillover effects from other children,
right,
rather than just through a pure school quality effect. And I didn't really understand why you did it that way. It would have seemed to me more obvious to just start with some schools are better than others, and that's
right.
Not because of spillovers from kids. But so I just wanted to get your reaction to that. And since you're already treading on controversial ground in this paper, why not go all the way and tell us what happens to time spent with children when one parent's not working?
Not working,
Not working. Yeah. Is that a pro-human capital thing for some?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't looked at that.
Maybe that's another paper.
But that's a good point, actually, because, yeah.
It may be that work from home is halfway to something that might be even more favorable for promoting human capital. And, of course, that's not a politically correct thought these days.
Get a job, right?
Yeah, no, but...
Yeah, I want him to get... That's why it's another paper. You can do that after you get the job.
No, but that's actually a very good point, because what I found with this education time data is that there is a significant decrease in trend starting from the 2010. So I want to also analyze this because there might be implications. So there is a very famous paper in the education of economics literature, the Ragret Race, which also was part of my previous title, that basically they saw an increase in these childcare activities from the 90s to the early 2000s. But now I see that this time is decreasing. I don't know if because parents pass more time on social media, on Netflix, as we have seen, or other type of reasons. So I want to have an additional paper on this. And this actually might be super interesting thing that I didn't think about. So thank you, yeah. Yes, please, sorry.
Super interesting topic. I just want to make the model even more complicated. As someone who had done some work on sibling spillovers, we know developmental-wise, parents are very important when the children are very young, but then siblings and peers become increasingly important during like middle school age. So, in your model, if you could also model time spent with siblings, that would be very, very interesting.
This is a very interesting point. So, like, obviously, I should speak also to the whole literature of Heckman and Cunha, right, about this differential productivity time with children in a different stage of their development. I haven't touched this in this paper, to be honest. I tried to get like some clear patterns that I can inform the model with, but that's a good point. Actually, I can extend this. Yeah, thank you. I think I am done with time, right? So thank you very much. It was very nice.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm from Boston University. I'm a PhD student there, and this is joint work with Shelby Buckman here at Stanford and Christina Tello-Trio at the US Census Bureau. The usual caveat applies that these are our views and not necessarily that of the US Census Bureau. So to start this talk, I want to focus on spouses. How does the opportunity to work from home for one spouse affect the outcomes of the other? So I want you all to think about a more traditional household. That's how we're going to start. So one might think that if the husband has the ability to work from home, this might create more of an opportunity for the husband to help with non-market work when we see that more traditionally that falls on the wife. And one might think that this could lead to increased labor force participation for the wife. On the other hand, let's say we have a world where the wife works from home. Well, if she's already doing the majority or more of the work from home, or the work at home, then she might increase this. And we might see an increased specialization whereby the wife spends even more time on non-market work in addition to the work from home, but also the husband has this increased market work potentially out of the home, maybe more of this greedy work and specialization that Claudia Golden touches upon. So the literature has touched on gender-specific outcomes, and a lot of the talks I think we'll see shortly and have seen talk about some spousal outcomes for work from home as well. So I want to talk about what we focus on. So we have firm-level exogenous shocks in our data using US Census data, which I'll talk about more. And we use these firm-level work-from-home adoption shocks to an individual to see how their spouse is affected in terms of their labor market outcomes. We can look at labor force participation, job switching probability, relative earnings, hours worked. We can also look at the probability of the marriage dissolving as well. We also have some external data that we bring into the census, which I'll highlight more, but all to say we can look at hybrid outcomes. So we can look at how firm-specific minimum day in office policies, minimum % of time in office, fully remote options affect these gender differences. And we'll also look at how these effects differ for parents versus non-parents. And we're really curious if work from home will change this within gender and within couple gender pay gap. Because one might think in the two worlds that I talked about, in one world, maybe if the husband gains work from home, we might see a closing of this gap. But if the wife gains work from home, we might see an expansion of this gap. And we think we can think more about that here. So our data primarily uses the longitudinal employer household survey in the US Census. So this has 95% of US private firms. We're using data 2010 to 2025. And so we have this firm information and individual information. And we also use this to create couples based on their home address and some other criterion. We then merge this data with the annual business survey, which gives us a yes or no answer to whether or not a firm allows any sort of work from home. But we also, and that is annual, so we have that in 2019 through 2025. We also have the Flex Index, which is an external private data set that we've been generally allowed to use in years 2023, 2024, and 2025 with this much more detailed information on work from home policy. And we can also see if that changes across different firms. We also have access to the American Community Survey, which we're going to merge into our census data. And importantly, this provides us with information on individual uptake of work from home. So we can use this for an IV structure where we know from the ABS or the Flex Index whether or not a firm allows for uptake of work from home, but then we'll actually see, does the spouse then take up this work from home? So we can really look at that channel. So our data set that we're going to collapse to will have couples who are heterosexual, ages 22 to 64, and stay together at least 2019 to 2022, for whom we have work from home information in at least 2019 and 2022 for at least one member of the couple. We'll also look at a sample that's more restrictive, where we know the work from home for both members of the couple, but we look at both of this. So our samples will consist of first this LEHD-ABS sample, where we'll look at more of this binary shock to work from home. In 2019, this firm does not offer work from home. In 2022, the firm does offer work from home. Then we can use our LEHD-ABS Flex sample to say what happens if the firm in 2019 didn't offer work from home, and now in 2022, it does offer a minimum policy of 1 to 2 days in office. So we can think more on the margin of how a certain level of work from home affects a couple. And then we also have this IV approach that I mentioned, using the ABS firm level data and the ACS to get some causal results. So our empirical strategy is an event study. We use this shock in work from home in 2022, but we can also test the shock for other years. And we're looking at, again, the firm not offering work from home in 2019 to offering it in 2022, and then seeing the effects on your spouse. We're controlling for industry, so we're controlling for this idea of your industry's original propensity to work from home and really looking at that firm level switch, shocking your spouse and then you. We have two initial census results that I want to highlight. These are sign and significance, as it takes some time to get these results out of the census. But we find that when husbands have access to work from home, as we thought, wives experience a positive effect on their labor force participation and job retention. So they're more likely to stay attached to the labor market, more likely to join the labor market. We have this suggestive evidence. I mean, it is significant, but we find that when wives have access to work from home, their husbands are more likely to switch jobs. And what we want to explore is, are they switching jobs, again, with this greedy work idea, so that they can work longer hours, they can work and earn higher wages. We still need to explore that. So we wanted to think about work from home through this model. This is based off of Olivetti 2024. The basic idea is that you have a unitary household model where you have some market work and some non-market work. The main thing I want to highlight here is our contribution. So you just think of this part of the equation as market work, this part is non-market work. Now we assume, for now, just that the husband is able to work from home, to simplify what we're doing. And we see here that the husband can do market work and market work that's work from home, but that might have this cost psi for various reasons that we've talked about now, the less likelihood of a promotion or the non-wage amenity. But then you also have the benefit that we're thinking about work from home in terms of multitasking. So even if it might lose productivity or have perceived productivity losses, it allows you to multitask and get some non-market work home, which might change the maximization problem for the wife, considering how many hours she'll do of market work. So to extend this model in the future, we do want to maximize over the decision of how much work from home the husband will perform, which we think fits naturally with our connection to the flex index, where we can look at the hybrid work requirements and how many hours people are actually required minimum to work from home, but we also know whether or not they actually take up this work from home. And we also want to look at adding some minimum non-work constraints and see how they affect our model, and extend this to a collective bargaining model, seeing how when we look at not just a unitary household, but also a collective household, how this might affect our results. In terms of empirical extensions, so we definitely want to extend this to parents versus non-parents. Currently, we can do that using our ACS data set, but we are also applying to extend to having all of the parent-child links in census. So we'll be able to do this for our whole data set. We also want to look at return to office, see how this complements other results that have come out today, because we can look at firms who allow work from home in 2022, 2021, and don't in 2024, 2025, and we have those flex index specific firm policies that we can look at. Yeah, so in summary, we have this rich census data, employer-employee matched panel with firm-level data on work from home from the annual business survey, but also this private data from the flex index. We have these two main results that went along with what we expected, that wives experience positive labor force effects from their husband working from home. And in contrast, husbands are more likely to change jobs when wives gain workplace flexibility, maybe suggesting these different implications for different future work by gender. And we're also developing a model to think more about the trade-offs posed by work from home. We think thinking about work from home as the benefit of multitasking versus the cost of promotion, et cetera, might be interesting to explore further. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I have to calm people. Yes. Oh, yeah, Jeff first.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. So one question I have is the work from home also has this impact on relaxing the dual career issue, that you don't have to be both at the same location, and because a wife is often the second mover and might have restricted opportunities because of that. Is it something that you can sort of comment on or look at?
Well, excitingly, we can definitely look at that. Originally, my co-author and I, Shelby, were thinking about doing that as a first paper, but we wanted to think more about the labor market implications first, more stagnated, but we do have addresses. That's partially how we form our couples. So in the future, it would be fascinating to look at what happens when couples move, because we completely agree. If it restricts the constraints for one member, it might also just increase their labor market outcomes, the them having a better fit at a job through work from home.
Super interesting. As I mentioned, we thought about doing this, but too much work. I'm so glad you did it. And then one question is that, well, within the same firm, right, different team, they may have different remote work policies. So I think for your IV, you could combine occupation information from ACS with the firm level flexible policies to create a stronger IV.
That's just such a good suggestion. Yeah, we are. I didn't mention, but we are also trying to use the going to use the ACS for the detailed occupation information. But I hadn't thought of it in that way, so I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
Just to follow up on Michelle's point, I think you have enough variation in local density to get at that a little bit. So if the husband starts to work from home in a small community, that may advantage the wife more in terms of expanding her opportunity set than if they're already in a very dense urban area where she's got a rich opportunity set. But I didn't get all the data sets in my head. You're able to follow people longitudinally,
yes,
even if they move location.
Yes.
So you can check all, you can look at all that. So
yes,
the thought experiment is husband shifts to work from home, rural area versus urban area. How does that differentially affect what happens to the wife?
I love that. I was also thinking about geographic variation in terms of social norms. So I think it'd be interesting too how much, I think geography will be rich for this, so I should definitely look into it. Thank you. Yeah.
Super interesting. So you are basically conditioning your sample based on couples who survive the pandemic. So
yes.
But they are definitely different than the others. So I wonder, because they are already flexible and they are supporting each other and they survive the pandemic. So to what extent, what happens if you run the results in the full sample, and to what extent you are worried about this type of omitted variable bias that you can't even capture?
I mean, that's a great point. We can definitely, I have not, but we definitely have the ability to run, because we can see at least of these couples change addresses. So we have pretty positive indication if they're leaving each other. Yeah, I think I would have to think about it more. It might be interesting to look at couples that have been together longer before to try to mitigate some of those concerns. But then, of course, you might be less likely to capture the childbearing age of couples. So, but I will think about that more, because there's, of course, selection with that. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
This is super interesting. I'd also be curious about sort of the direct effects on the individuals themselves, as opposed to only like the cross spillovers of like, how does it affect women when their company has an RTO, that sort of thing.
Definitely. That's a great point. And we can do that. Interestingly enough, like some of those results, and we release some of them, are in fact opposite. So we have even more strength to believe that this is directly from the spouse if your individual goes in the opposite direction. So I think it only strengthens our results to look more into how those might be going in the same direction or different directions. Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meng. Thank you for having me. I'm a PhD candidate at London School of Economics. Today, I'm going to present my work on fathers working from home and household labor division. So in this work, I'm studying whether a temporary exposure to working from home can persistently shift household behavior. And I study this problem through the lens of COVID-19, where millions of fathers are forced to work from home regardless of their prior preferences. So back to the topic, why should we care about household labor division? Let me show you the gender inequality in the US. So this graph plots the decomposition of gender inequality in the US from 1980s to 2010s. In 1980s, men earned 58% more than women. And by 2010s, this figure dropped below 50%. But when we look at this pink area, the child-related gender inequality, it's not only increasing in absolute scale from 28% to 32%, but it's also increasing as a share of the total gender inequality. So in 2010s, childbirth can account for 70% of gender inequality. And why does that happen? because of household labor division. So when the first child is born, the father's trajectory remain roughly unaffected. Mothers step back, they work less, they seek flexibility, they take more leaves. Those are all at wage costs. And the natural response would be, well, can increasing fathers' household involvement, like encourage maternal employment? There are some policies, but the effectiveness of these policies are limited because of its voluntary nature. So when these policies are optional, only the parent who is already bearing these caregiving needs, there's this childcare preferences, tend to opt in these policies. And in practice, these policies often reinforce gender gaps. And the COVID-19 brought us something different. So with the school shutdowns and the workplace shutdowns, fathers are forced to work from home where their children live. Let me show you the magnitude of this shock. So this blue line plots the share of the US population affected by any kind of work from home orders. So starting in March 2020, within 4 weeks, all the states have issued some kind of work from home mandate. And most of them are lifted by June 2021. In this shaded area, I will refer to this as COVID period throughout my talk. And then let's see how many workers actually work their full day at home. So pre-COVID, this number stabilized around 7%. I'm sure we are all very familiar with this surge during the COVID, and then stabilize around 20%. So why does this shift matter for my study? Because this shift is involuntary. This gives me something really rare in the household economics, that is the exogenous variation in working from home. And that allows me to study what happened within household when fathers are forced to work from home. Let's zoom in the household and see what happens within the household, some descriptive patterns. So here I'm showing you the daily time parents spent with children for the last 20 years from American Time Use Survey. So the daily time spent with children consists of two kinds of childcare. The first one is primary childcare, where the childcare is done as the main activity, such as feeding, bathing, reading to the children. And secondary childcare, which is the childcare done while doing something else, like cooking or working. So what we see on the graph is that for mom, they spend 7.5 hours per day with their children, and while fathers only spend 5 hours per day. And this 2.5 hour gap is very stable, barely moves pre-COVID. During COVID, due to school closure, both parents scrambled to fill in the gap. They both increased their time with children by 1 hour, but what happens post-COVID is interesting, where we see with the school reopening and the restrictions lifted, mothers soon return back to the pre-COVID baseline, while fathers maintain this elevated level of childcare. So that brings my question. My paper asks, can this involuntary exposure to working from home shift labor division within household persistently? And specifically, I'm asking these two questions. Does work from home culturally increase fathers' involvement in unpaid labor? And if so, do these effects persist? And the second question is, does increased paternal involvement promote maternal employment? In other words, when fathers are providing more support in the household, can mother be relieved from these household burdens and be encouraged to participate more in the labor market? And on the first question, to address the endogeneity concerns arising from father selecting themselves into certain occupations based on their underlying childcare preferences, I'm using a shift-share IV, and well, it's constructed by the state industry level work from home rate. Hopefully use this term to capture the policy shock, and also the share, which is the pre-COVID occupation level feasibility score by Dingo and Neyman. And hopefully this will capture the exposure to these policy shocks. And on the second question, I'm using the leveraging the panel structure of the current population survey and run some difference in event studies, and also explore the heterogeneity effect by occupation flexibility. So before I run out of time, let me show you some mean results. So here, I'm going to present you the effect of fathers working from home during COVID on fathers' time allocation and mother's time allocation. And I'm going to show you the results pre-COVID because I use this as a placebo effect because we should not expect any results on pre-COVID outcomes during COVID working from home if my AVI is valid. And then I'm going to show you the COVID results for contemporaneous effect post-COVID for the persistent test. And the unit is minutes per day. So first results I'm showing here is on the commute time, which is really intuitive. When father work from home during COVID, their commute time dropped by 29 minutes or 94%. And then this working from home enable fathers to spend 3.5 hours per day more with their children. This is mostly secondary childcare. But this still matters for mom because it enables mom to reduce their time spent with children and also unpaid labor by roughly 2 hours. And this also enables mom to increase paid work time. But what happens post-COVID on fathers? We see they persist their increase in unpaid labor, but transform from secondary childcare to active caregiver. This 76 minutes unpaid labor post-COVID is consisting of 43 minutes of primary childcare and 33 minutes of household work. But what's puzzling here is on mothers. Despite fathers' sustained increase in unpaid work, we do not see any corresponding reduction in mom's unpaid work, and nor their increase in their paid work. So why does this happen? My hypothesis is that mothers have to be employed in a flexible occupation to capitalize on father support. Their occupations have to allow them to utilize the support when the father provides their support. And let me show you I run some difference event study. I will show you the difference event study graphs, and I will also show the difference estimates in black number here. So when I run the event studies on the whole sample, we see that when father work from home, mother's labor force participation does not respond. But when we zoom into the mothers that have ever experienced in the market, we see when father work from home, their labor force participation rate increased by 4 percentage points during the COVID and 5 percentage points post-COVID. When we split the sample by occupation flexibility, we see these effects mostly concentrated in flexible occupation mothers. When father work from home during COVID, these mothers increased their labor force participation by 7 percentage points persistently, and that accounts for a 10% increase. While mothers in rigid occupation does not experience any positive effects. So the key takeaway from this paper is that a temporary exposure to working from home can persistently increase paternal involvement. However, for mothers to utilize this support, they have to be employed. They have to have this occupation flexibility. And I'm going to skip this policy implication because I'm running out of time, and feedback and comments welcome.
I want to give a different interpretation of some of your key results. So here it is. Fathers suffer a huge child enjoyment penalty because they work so much and mostly outside the home. They get a raw deal. This child enjoyment penalty for fathers diminished persistently because of the COVID shock. And so more child enjoyment for fathers after the pandemic, less commuting time. So fathers get a less bad deal in this respect than before the pandemic. So I put it that way very provocatively as a complete kind of contrast to the way you put it. And I guess so 2 points. One, I don't see what in your data analysis really differentiates between those two. But the larger point I want to convey to you is you're dealing with a very interesting topic, but there's like a, how to say it, an ideological overlay to the interpretation that seems somewhat distinct from the evidence itself. So even, and I understand this motherhood penalty, child penalty term is widely used in the literature, but you know, it's got this connotation that somehow spending time with kids is a bad thing, which may or may not be the case depending on your kids and the person and so on. But anyway, I hope you get the point. I don't mean to be, I don't mean to give you a hard time other than just a kind of a more neutral tone in the presentation. I think it would serve you well.
Thank you for your comment. Any?
There was also a question, is there something that favors the interpretation that you kind of offered us versus the one I offered us? The mere fact that the women aren't gravitating towards more work suggests, even when some of the fathers have more flexibility, doesn't suggest they feel like spending time with their children is such a bad deal. So you understand what I'm saying? What is it? What's wrong with the characterization I gave, or what in the data favors your characterization over the one I gave?
I do find that during the COVID, when the father work from home, they tend to spend more time with their children while during the daytime. So that means, I suppose that means like the fathers. So your story is that, if I understand it correctly, so your story is that fathers do not enjoy.
No, they like it. They appreciate the opportunity. They appreciate the opportunity to spend time with children. This huge child enjoyment penalty they had been suffering was diminished. That's all I'm saying. So, but you come at it from the idea that spending time with kids is bad and mothers are escaping this.
Well, that's not entirely my idea. It's not.
I know it's not. I know it's not. It is the prevailing idea. I understand that, but I'm pushing back against that, and at least asking for evidence that distinguishes between those two views. Okay.
Right.
I'll stop here.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, maybe related to this, so I think the penalty indeed refers usually to the earnings penalty. I'm not sure, but there's I think a study in Denmark that looks at the increase of parental leave, and that part of it is actually has to be taken by the fathers, and so they also have this exogenous variation in how much time the father spends at home. And my recollection is that they actually found again that fathers did actually learn that they enjoy spending time with their children, and that had a permanent effect as well. So you may want to link with that literature as well on parental leave policies and changes in that.
Yes. And I do think there are also some literature on the parental leave showing that these are also, well, even though the paternity leave is compensated well, there are still low take-up. And also, even considering these like parental leave, we still don't see any, well, significant improvement in like the household labor division. All right, thank you so much for your comments.
One other, I mean, I think the penalty versus enjoyment thing is interesting. One way to look at it is, do you know the age of the children? I have to say, like spending time with a 13-year-old versus a 3-year-old, there's a different sense of pleasure or not pleasure. But do you know if you had the age of the children in it?
I do have the age of children. Well, I do find, because American time use data is quite small, I couldn't like split that sample, but I do that sample split in the current population survey analysis and do not find any difference impact on that.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today I will be talking about remote work and fertility. I have a lot of slides, so I'll try my best to finish all the slides.
Okay, so in the US history, every time we have economic downturn, typically we'll see a temporary fertility decline. But this decline is only lasts for about like 2 to 5 years, and then will bounce back. In other words, economic downturn tends to shift the timing of fertility, but not changing the total number of children a woman will have in her lifetime. However, something is different for the 2008 economic recession. As you can see, from 2007 or 2008, fertility has been declining, but not bouncing back. So many scholars are very worried about this trend. This may signal a permanent decline in lifetime fertility. So currently, the US fertility rate is below the replacement rate, meaning that we're not having enough number of children to replace the people who are passing by. And this poses very important policy challenges, exacerbating the population aging issue. So many people have proposed that flexible work-family policies may offer a solution to this low fertility issue, especially in OECD countries where the majority of people actually want to give birth to children, but they don't have the opportunities or resources to achieve their desired fertility. However, US is behind other high-income nations in providing institutional work-family support. As the figure shows, this displays a ranking of the generosity of parental paid leave at the national level. If you look at the bottom, US is actually the only country that doesn't offer any parental leave policy at the national level. But you may ask, like, what about the state policy? So in 2023, only 27% of workers had access to paid family leave, and 90% of workers had access to unpaid family leave in the US. And as we all know, the access to family leaves also varies disparately. As a result, many American women opt to delay fertility until they are established in their careers, and many others, they end up having fewer children. Well, contrary to previous findings that economic downturn leads to decreased fertility, we observed a remarkable pandemic fertility rebound in 2021 to 2022. Especially this rebound was largest among younger, highly educated women, Hispanics, and for first birth. And many scholars have hypothesized that while remote work might be the reason, specifically remote work may help women stay employed and mitigate work-life conflict issues. And to this audience, I don't need to explain, remote work is here to stay, and we know workers desire more work from home days than the employers are willing to offer. There has been emerging literature on the association between remote work and fertility intentions, and the results are all over the place. And in the fertility literature, we know fertility intentions do not always translate to completed fertility. So these two are very different. There are very few studies have examined the association between remote work and completed fertility. This one study found that regular remote work access, regardless of usage, negatively linked to first birth in the UK, but aids fertility for long commuters. In another study, they found that the widening availability of broadband internet boosts higher order births among highly educated women in Germany, possibly through increasing remote and part-time work and better work-life integration. But this second study, they didn't directly look at remote work and fertility. So they look at the availability of broadband internet and remote work and fertility separately. So the two most important gaps in the literature, first, we don't have any studies in the US context. And second, the previous studies overlooked issues of endogeneity. And depending on the specific endogeneity, the relationship could go either way. Theoretically, the relationship between remote work and fertility is really ambiguous. On the one hand, remote work may increase fertility. For example, remote work may reduce resource constraints by helping women remain in their employment and maintain work hours. It may also reduce the time constraints by cutting commuting and grooming time, etc. There's some suggestive evidence showing that remote work may promote family formation. On the other hand, remote work may reduce fertility because there has been a lot of work showing that remote work intensifies work-family conflict with multitasking and longer work hours, especially for women with young children. And remote work may also diminish promotion opportunities and slow wage growth, particularly for young workers. So theoretically, it's really ambiguous. I would say the biggest challenge for this project is to find suitable data. In the US, we just don't have many good data for this topic. So we will need to find a data set that is big enough for us to observe fertility, completed fertility. Also, ideally, for the identification, we want to have individual panel data. So the current population survey individual level panel is our best choice. It's not perfect. So we are doing a lot of, we'll cook based on the materials we have. So we use this panel data from CPS from 2019 to 2021. And this panel is a little bit awkward in the way that it follows households over 16 months in the 4-8-4 rotation patterns. Basically, interview household for 4 months, and then the household rotates out for 8 months, and then they come back again for another 4 months. In other words, each household can have at most 8 observations. So we restrict the sample to women aged 15 to 49, whoever employed before pandemic, excluding self-employed. And then fertility was captured by observing whether there was a new household member under 1-year-old in the current month. And we just use a difference model is in individual season fixed effects, more to follow. So our treatment group is defined as whether a respondent's major pre-pandemic occupation is teleworkable. And we use this updated index developed by a team in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this index should be an updated version of the Dingo and I'm surprised not so many teams are using this. So it's a dummy variable version. So we merge this index with the CPS data. We also do robustness checks using all kinds of indices, including the ones we constructed by ourselves and also Dingo and Naaman indices. So model specification, this just looks like a typical different diff model. I'm happy to talk more details about this. I would like to highlight 2 analytical decisions, which are very important in fertility research. And I see this mistake appears in many previous studies. First, we decided to backdate the treatment and time fixed effects by 9 months because we were really trying to capture the timing of conception, because we were interested in the behavior mechanisms behind this fertility decision. Second, for all analysis, we stratified by parity, first birth versus higher order birth. It's very important because the considerations behind first birth is completely different for the considerations behind higher order birth. Now let's look at the results. For first birth, we have seen an overall positive effects in the total sample and across all subgroups that we look at. Especially the effect is particularly larger among the age group 30 to 34, highly educated and married and partnered women. And for higher order births, we see overall positive effects, but the magnitude of effects are much smaller compared to first birth, and we don't see any significant subgroup differences. We also did some analysis trying to tap into the couple dynamics using a subsample of the CPS panel. So this result shows the first birth. As we can see, for both men and women, remote work boosts fertility. But if you look at among women, the group of women actually experienced the largest fertility increase is the women with teleworkable husband. So the effect size is much bigger compared to women with unemployed husband and women with non-teleworkable husband. We don't see any subgroup differences among husbands with all kinds of work arrangements for their wives. For higher order births, again, we see overall positive effects, but we don't see any significant subgroup differences. We also look at a lot of possible mechanisms. So among all these mechanisms we look at, so we also look at family formation, which is not listed here. The only mechanism we have solid evidence for is employment. So we found remote work reduced risks of unemployment and increased risks of part-time employment. So we didn't find any evidence for the hypothesis that remote work promotes family formation or remote work promotes work-family integration. We also don't find any evidence for the argument that people simply have more baby together because they have more time spent together, they have nothing else to do during the pandemic. So to summarize the results, so overall, we found positive, consistent positive effects between remote work and fertility. And the effects are particularly large for first births and are greater among college-educated, married, or partner women. And the effects are likely due to remote work helping women stay employed, especially part-time. So at the end, I also want to give you a first taste about an ongoing project that we're doing using much better data in Europe. So we actually have administrative data in Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, where we have information about every people in the country. Because of H1B ban, my collaborators were not able to travel back to Finland and Sweden to export the results, but luckily the Danish results are exported. As we can see, these are results from a synthetic different diff. We do see across all the 3 countries positive effects between remote work and fertility. Thank you.
Super interesting. 2 small things. One, I wonder if the 9-month lag is the right amount, because there are delays between intention to have a child and conception. And you also have miscarriages, obviously. So I don't know whether there's, and that probably varies by age as well. So I don't know whether there's solid evidence on this, on what these lags between intention to have a child and actual birth look like. But if there is, you might want to modify the model. I guess the main substantive issue in this is whether what you're picking up, to what extent what you have is a rebound effect. Because there was a shortfall in fertility during the pandemic, not surprisingly, and then there's a recovery. So maybe you can speak to that.
That's a very good question. So for the first one, the 9 months backdating is kind of a common practice in the fertility literature, but we also do robustly checks using like say 8 months or 10 months. The miscarriage information is just not available. So it's very hard to deal with that kind of analysis. And then the second thing, that's actually the major limitation of this paper, because we don't have long enough of the data to really say whether it's just shift in fertility timing or it's shift in lifelong fertility. So we need to wait until these women reach age 50 to track their cohort fertility to answer this question. Yes.
Have you thought at all about just differences in childcare costs, or who's there to take care of the child? Because you can see like the husband and wife being part of this, but then there's other family members. So I don't know if you can look at any geographic differences on the availability of childcare, things like this.
That's a great question. So the only subgroup analysis we did is whether the state has paid parental leave, and we didn't find any significant subgroup differences. But yeah, we could look at more most heterogeneity analysis. Yes.
So super interesting. I mean, we talked earlier. We've been looking at. I think the hard thing for us to figure out is direction of causation, because there's 2 stories. One is I can work from home, and therefore it's easy to look after kids, so fertility goes up. And then the other is we're going to have a kid. We know we're trying to have a kid, and maybe don't quite get there, but we're trying to have it. And so in advance, I move into a work from home job. And those, in all honesty, they're probably both happening. So the question is, how do you have any way to that was the big challenge that we're facing, that we see the correlation. Right. It's not entirely clear what share is each of the 2 directions, or some other third thing. Like as Steve said, one is the rebound. There's another thing is during that period, there's a lot of job loss. And I remember in 2008, there were some claims in some industries, there was a baby boom because for women, if I was in the UK, I heard this, but for women, if you're pregnant, you're protected under employment law. And, it's hard to know how big this was. There's various other effects going on as well, but.
That's such a great question. So we did look at the switching pattern, right? So we look at the jobs, whether they switch from treatment to control groups right before and after they give birth to a child. I think this kind of intent to trade model specification had deal with some part of it. But then we also conducted bonding analysis, trying to bond the proportion of women who actually switch treatment group statuses. And I mean, the bonding analysis, basically this concern is not big enough to completely eliminate our results for the first birth at least. And then your second question, so what's your second question?
Well, the main one was the causality. I mean, we were trying to look at occupation, but then even occupation switches. So then it was like, well, after what age does occupation not switch? By the time you get to 30, it looks like it's relatively stable. Then you're looking at a very thin slither of people, 30 plus, and they have to be graduates probably because that's where they're liked. So I think the hardest thing is looking at the causal effect, and I'm totally on board with the correlations. It's just.
Right. I mean, as we briefly talked about before, the switch from treatment to control, from control to treatment, actually is kind of equivalent, comparable in terms of sizes. It's not, as people thought, women mostly switch from non-teleworkable jobs to teleworkable jobs right before or after they give birth to children, which we found surprising, but at least it's in the CPS data. So that's why I think the European project would be more exciting because it has more information for us to tackle this causality issue. We actually know exactly whether this individual person worked from home or not. Well, the US, the data are really, really limited. Now it came back to me about your question about unemployment. So we did look at the fertility of unemployed people. And yeah, so for the unemployed people, they also have a fertility increase, actually, but only when the women are unemployed, not the men. So when the men are unemployed, actually, there's a fertility decline. And then we kind of compare the effect sizes between the unemployed groups with the remote work groups to tackle this hypothesis that while they're having more babies because they are spending more time together, the magnitude of remote work groups is much bigger than the unemployed groups, meaning it's not only a mechanism of time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't really need to do much introduction after Emma's presentation, but so let me just say one thing, which is that, so this is obviously new work on remote work and fertility. We're going to piggyback on a bunch of new data that we've been, well, even not that new data that we've been collecting in SWAY, our US-based survey, and in our global survey of working arrangements. And so this is a joint paper with Sheva, Nick, Caitlin, Steve, Matthias, and Pablo. And Caitlin, unfortunately, was supposed to present, but she's sick. And so you're stuck with me giving a very unpolished presentation. So hopefully I won't do too much of a bad job. So yeah, the motivation for this paper is, yeah, we know fertility has been declining for several decades, more so perhaps in the developed world than say in Africa. But given the recent shift to work from home that we've seen, this really raises the question, can potentially, by alleviating people's time budgets, change their propensity to want to have kids or not? And so that's what we're after in this project. And so what we're going to piggyback on is a huge data collection effort that, as I mentioned, we've been doing in SWAY and in GSWAY for several years now. And so basically we're going to be able to get a bunch of variables about people's fertility experience ever in their life in the past 10 years or so, as well as their intentions going forward. And so in those data that we can link to work from home outcomes, because both of these surveys are about working arrangements, we're going to find a positive correlation between own work from home, partner work from home, and these fertility outcomes. But so as we were just discussing, it's not clear what really explains the correlation. So one story is this purely causal effect whereby suddenly the opportunity to work from home appears. And so people, for example, have looser time budgets, and they can, and so they might change their choices in response to that. The other story is maybe now that we're in a world in which work from home is possible, and that facilitates to having kids, maybe there's this occupation switching into the sorts of jobs that allow you to work from home if you are already planning or intending to have kids. And so, yeah. So what we're going to do in the second half of the paper is show you some initial explorations that we've done with US data, in specifically the CPS and the ACS, to try to tease apart kind of what evidence do we see of each of these stories. And so, as I said, the data sources that we're going to use, we're going to look at our global survey of working arrangements, in which we have about 20,000 responses from 38 countries collected in 2024 and 2025. So if you've looked at some of our previous work, previously we were focusing on a sample of people who were closely attached to the labor force. We're going to relax that for this project because fertility decisions are very correlated with labor force participation. And so we're going to expand the sample both in SWAY and GSWAY and bring in a bunch of these fertility outcomes. And like I said, for the second half of the paper, we're going to use the American community survey to think about the causal effect of work from home on fertility, and look at occupation switching in the CPS to see if there's any evidence for people basically trying to find work from home jobs, work from homeable jobs if they are considering having kids. And so in SWAY, and I've spent, so this is the part of the paper that I'm most comfortable with because I work with the SWAY data and to some extent with the G-Sway question design directly, we've included a battery of questions that try to elicit different types of fertility outcomes. So we ask how many kids you have ever had in your life, how many kids have you had in the past 10 years. So we specifically ask about 2015 and later years, and ask for the year of birth for each of those children in the past 10 years. And additionally, we ask about planned fertility, so whether you want to have any additional kids, regardless of whether you've had them in the past, and at what ages do you, at the latest, you plan to have those kids. And so the key result that we get in both SWAY and G-SWAY, so I believe these are the numbers from G-SWAY, so in our global sample of 38 countries, is that if you compare people who say that they cannot work from home to people who are able to work from home at least 1 day per week, the people who are able to work from home have higher total fertility outcomes. So this includes past and desired future fertility or planned future fertility. And the relationship is even stronger when not just the respondent, but their partner also reports working from home at least 1 day per week. And so this is true for women and men. So these are the full regression outcomes. It's actually not super different. We find a significant coefficient regardless of which fertility outcome we look at, whether it's children since 2023, planned fertility, or the sum of some past and future planned fertility, and something similar when we look at SWAY, where we actually have a much larger sample spanning, I believe, from late 2022 up until the latest month. Now, how big are these effects? So here we're running a thought experiment in which, so on the top row, what we have is the average total past plus planned fertility that we observe in our sample as reported by the respondents. And so if we think about how big are these associations between the respondent's own ability to work from home, the partner's ability to work from home, and the sum of the two. So if you think about it, for a couple in which both can work from home compared to a couple in which neither can, we get something anywhere between a 9 to 22% increase in fertility, interpreting the coefficients causally, which we'll talk about in a second, relative to the baseline. And so these effects are not going to probably stem or reverse the decline in fertility that we've been seeing for decades, but they're not nothing. So to give you an idea, if you combine our estimates with measures of women's labor force participation, with the change in work from home that we've seen over the past several years, then again, interpreted causally, which we can argue about, our coefficients would generate something like 2% more births per year in the US. All right, so again, the key question is, so we have this empirical relationship. Work from home, at least in our SWAY and G-SWAY data, seems to predict higher desired and past fertility. The question is, how much of this is a causal effect? How much of it is an occupational switching effect? If I really want to have kids, I can, so in a post-pandemic world, I can now look for a job that allows me to work from home and thereby be more comfortable making the choice that I would have made anyway. All right, and so we're going to try to tease out whether there's any evidence for either of these two explanations in other data. And so what we're going to try to do, and here let me skip this. This is the specification that I think we're interested in when it comes to the causal effect. So what we're trying to do is run a regression on the likelihood of you having a child in the ACS on whether the type of job that you have allows you to work from home or not. And we're going to allow the coefficient on the work from home ability of your job to vary across time. And so basically we want to test whether after the pandemic relative to before, people in work from homeable jobs are now more likely to have kids relative to those who don't have work from homeable jobs. And so we've had many debates between the research team about how to measure work from home ability. So we've tried the Dingle and Neiman measure that many people have been using in the conference. So for now, what we're using is the Hansen et al. Measure that Nick and Steve and co-authors have built based on job postings. So basically, this measure is going to be higher in occupations in which, and correct me if I butcher anything, in occupations in which a bigger share of job postings are for jobs that can be done remotely to some extent. Yeah? All right. And so we're going to try to run this specification, and we'd love to, I think, look in more detail at Emma's paper because we're not really finding anything. So there might be a lot of measurement error in our work from home ability indicator or index right now. We're still working on this. Right now, we don't really have any clear evidence in the ACS for a causal effect of work from home on fertility. The other side of the story is, again, whether people might be changing jobs into jobs that allow them to work from home, especially if they're interested in having kids. And so here we're going to look at some CPS data. So why is this potentially a concern, potentially not a concern? Well, so when you look at people's occupation, this is something that tends to be very stable later in life, not so much early on in life. So people who are entering their prime fertility years or are still in their prime fertility years, say in their 20s or early 30s, it's going to be quite easy for them to potentially change occupations in the direction that we think they might be later on in life. So something like above 95% of people don't really switch between major occupational groups after the age of 35 or 40. And so is there any evidence of this? That there's job switching in the direction of work from home? It kind of looks like there might be. So what we're looking at in these graphs on the vertical axis, is an index for the work from home ability of the occupation people report in the CPS during the second wave in which they're interviewed compared with the first wave. And it does look like for people in their 20s, both for men and for women, they seem to be moving in the direction of more work from homeable jobs when they're in their 20s, but not when they're in their 30s. And so there does seem to be a little bit of credence for this reverse causality. So let me leave it there. We find a pretty robust relationship in our survey data between the ability for you to work from home or for your partner to work from home and fertility outcomes and intentions. Teasing apart how much of this is causal and how much of this is this selection or occupational switching effect. Not so straightforward, we're realizing, and so happy to discuss more.
Very interesting paper. So just to confirm, we didn't find anything in ACS either, but ACS is cross-sectional data. And when we try to run exactly the same model specification, but with maybe education and year interactions, the pre-trained we can just not get rid of. So eventually we ditch ACS data and stick with CPS individual panel. And another thing, I think it's very important to do parity-specific analysis if you use CPS individual panel, because if you just loop all the birth parities together, you're not finding anything. But once you specify by first birth and higher order birth, the effect shows up.
Yeah, so absolutely. As you were presenting, I jotted down first birth versus subsequent births, which is, I believe, not something that we've looked at. And I think, yeah, we should definitely look at that. I think with the CPS, it's still, correct me if I'm wrong, not super easy to figure out if somebody has had a child in the past year or so, depending on how the variables are reported. Yeah.
Small points. So one, Danny Tannenbaum has a paper about showing that after women have a child, they're more likely to be in a work from home job. So just in terms of thinking about that mechanism, that paper might be a helpful reference. And then the second idea is like something that Matt Kahn and I did in our paper was think about college degrees as something that is like more fixed and like that as an indication of whether you have a skill set that could be done from home versus not. Maybe that would be useful in your setting in the ACS.
I totally agree. We've been looking at, a lot of it is like trying to find in doing the diff of diff, exactly right, it's like what's the thing that's fixed? And partly occupation is not that well measured. I'm trying to remember some of these things. Is really not that
Work from home mobility, conditional occupation is not that well measured.
Yeah, occupation itself is not that well measured, and work from home mobility. The Dingle and Neiman thing just does not, to be honest, does not look fantastic. It has some things like elementary school teachers has been work from home, and certainly my kids' elementary school teachers are not at work. And then, so we moved to looking more education, which is a rougher variable, but is well measured and is fixed over time. So yeah, I totally on board. We're kind of trying to figure that out, and it's going in the right direction, but we just didn't get it together for today. Sounds like the job market candidates. They're always like, they have such a great paper, they're not quite together.
Yeah, go for it.
On the measurement error issue and the classification, which I think is a serious concern, there's two levels of measurement error here. One is whether you have a measure that is accurately measuring the work from home frequency or propensity within an occupation. We think our measure, the Hansen et al. Measure, is a little better than Dingle and Neiman on that front. But even if you had a perfect such measure, we know, and this is in the Hansen et al. Paper, there's tremendous variation across firms in the same industry, same occupation, in the rate at which they actually offer work from home opportunities. So at the individual level, and these are all individual level regressions, there's still a lot of measurement error that's probably generating an attenuation bias effect in the key coefficients of interest.
And yeah, I believe we're out of time. So thanks so much.